moving to our second speaker, we have discussed why it is important to get the consent from the stakeholders and how we can protect the rights of the communities as we do these projects. Now we're going to move on to our third speaker and the last speaker of today, Herbert, who is a well-experienced energy economist from Uganda, and he will demonstrate to us how carbon credit can produce revenue for clean energy. He's coming in with a specific example on carbon credit. Yeah. Herbert, the screen is all yours.
I'm called Herbert Murungi. I'm from Uganda. Stella has already introduced. I'm an energy economist by training, a research fellow at the Macquarie University Business School, a co-founder and the team leader of the Kyoto Innovation Enterprises, which is basically a youth-led software enterprise registered and operating in Uganda, and as well as a project manager under NET's institutional clean cooking project in Eastern Uganda. So it's a pleasure to present and share with you my knowledge and as well as learn from you what could be missing from my side. Good evening once again. As I was invited, I'll bring share my views and my knowledge about carbon credits as a catalyst in promoting adoption and use of renewable energy, as well as conserving our environment in the perspective of sub-Saharan Africa. So we all know that maybe giving a little background about carbon emissions and why we need to discuss the topic of carbon credits in line of accelerating renewable energy adoption. That globally, that reliance on fossil fuels such as petrol, diesel, and other conventional, including firewood and charcoal, contributes to over 60% of the carbon emissions. But in this case, sub-Saharan Africa contributes less than 5% of the total global emissions. So meaning that sub-Saharan Africa, yes, we are convinced to offset what the global industrial giants are emitting by offsetting the carbon in the atmosphere. Well, but again, we'll see that over 700 people globally do not have access to clean and reliable electricity. And again, over 1.2 billion people still rely on conventional sources to cook. And the largest, over 80% or 90% of this population lies in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So, this means that in Africa, then we need really to take up initiatives to promote the use of renewable energy or clean energies so that we reduce on the over-reliance on conventional sources, mostly in cooking, especially firewood, charcoal, and the crop residues. But again, research and statistics clearly show that sub-Saharan Africa carbon emissions over 60% arise from our poor, can I say poor or traditional agricultural practices, and where we have to burn forest grasses, clear forests, use untested or unapproved pesticides, and so on. However, then it calls for more of a gap, especially on the energy side. I wouldn't want to go on the agricultural side, but again, the agriculture also is contributing more to the carbon emissions, and calling for policies to look at better or improved agricultural practices to eliminate, to reduce on the carbon emissions. So I had already given you statistics about energy access in Africa. The sub-Saharan Africa has the least energy access rates in the world, and over 80% of the 1.2 billion people who are relying on conventional sources in sub-Saharan Africa. But despite of the low energy access in Africa, Africa remains naturally endowed with natural resources, especially solar resources, wind energy, and hydro resources. But these ones are still underdeveloped, and then they have left bigger population relying on conventional or do not have access to clean and reliable energy. So today, I'm looking mostly at what are carbon credits and how we can use them to accelerate adoption of renewable energy and as well as conserve our environment. So carbon credits, to give a brief explanation, that carbon credits they represent a market-based approach where to emission reduction. In other words, they are incentives given to users and manufacturers of energy technologies and fuels so that they can accelerate the use of those modern technologies which are less carbon, which emit less carbons or no carbons. So the intention is majorly to accelerate the production and the usage. So the metrics, the mechanism of how the carbon credits work, it works through 3 stages. And one includes generation via emission reduction projects. That's when you set up an energy project, like producing improved cook stoves, or could be producing ethanol, or any improved fuel, could be ethanol, could be briquettes, which are widely and wide in Uganda. For that case, I'm from Uganda, I did tell you. Then they follow trading and verified markets. Then there is where traders meet in verified markets and also measure the impact, how much tons of carbon emissions has your product, or let's say a fuel or a product has reduced. If someone uses an improved cook stove, for instance, how many tons of carbon emissions of some kind has reduced. So it's mostly, carbon credits are mostly, like I've explained before, are an economic incentive used for sustainable practices and also interest more investments in renewable energy infrastructure and conservation initiatives. Of course, like I said earlier, that if you promote carbon credits for renewable energy technologies and production and usability, for instance, briquettes, more forests will be conserved, given that mostly in Africa we rely on our forests as a source of income, source of fuel, which leads to cutting down on trees. So, of course, like I had explained before, how the carbon credit process works, starting with the project development, coming up with a renewable energy project, for instance, could be a large-scale production of improved cooking stoves, could be a large-scale production of boilers. I can say I'm running a project where we are having different suppliers come to manufacture boilers for schools so that we can shift them from over-relying on firewood to start using electricity for cooking. And this has been piloted in Kenya with stunning results. So we're also piloting it in Uganda to see how it works. Then later we'll be introducing the carbon credit concepts under the ministry to attract more schools to adopt to shift transition from firewood-based cooking to electricity-based cooking with its related benefits. Then, after setting up a renewable project, how it works, then the emission reductions are measured and verified against established standards. So we're moving towards the standards. There's international standards set up for emission and set up to measure the emission which have reduced, your technology of fuel has reduced. And then third, verified carbon standards are issued and registered in the markets. This is now a transparency issue. How they are measured, is it transparent, and how they are issued? And that's one of the challenges that one of the challenges really is still faced in sub-Saharan Africa, that these markets haven't been developed, and somehow, somewhere, the innovators or the manufacturers of these technologies, they either feel cheated or they don't know what to do. Either they are cheated or not. Then after issuing the credits, the revenue from the credit sales fund subsequent clean energy product. So the revenues are used now to invest in clean energy. Well, this is more like what I was explaining before, how the process moves from the project. When you set up the project, then the verification occurs and issuance of carbon credits. Now, moving to types, what are types of carbon credits we have in the world? So we have two distinct types of carbon credits which work for different purposes. One is the compliance markets. These ones are mandatory, like when the government comes and sets compliance procedures or compliance laws or policies to manufacturers. This could be like a manufacturer, someone selling fossil fuels. We are made now to offer to pay some money. Like my colleague Aaron was giving an example of imported old cars in Uganda, used cars in Uganda. So these are compliances that what the revenues generated from these statutory obligations or compliance procedures is used now to compensate the people or companies who are now working towards offsetting carbon emissions. Then, on the other side, we have voluntary markets. So the voluntary markets include companies which set independent targets and purchase credits for corporate social responsibilities. For instance, we have seen companies like Coca-Cola, among others, really rewarding individuals and other companies which are trying to conserve the environment, like collecting the used bottles and so on. But when they're not forced, so that they can maintain a good public image and also ensure sustainability in their business activities. This is all to the fact that now in the modern era, people's attitudes are now shifting, especially in the airlines, when they find that the company is does not care or cater for the environment. There is sometimes campaigns like from environmental activists urging people to abandon their products or services. So, what is the benefit of adopting carbon credits in accelerating the adoption of renewable energy in Africa? We understand actually renewable energy in Africa, why it is still less developed and the access to electricity is still low because of there's one of the reasons, among others, is the funding gap. So, carbon pricing generated in 2014 alone, carbon pricing generated over 100 billions. This shows actually the potential substantial growth in the market for scale up if other people are sensitized and brought on board. So for renewable energy development, we see that carbon credits provide benefits in different ways. One is through financing mechanisms that carbon credits, they help to bridge the gap in clean energy projects, funding gap in clean energy projects, like when some companies are taxed and the money is distributed in form of grants to startups and other innovators already in the space of clean energy. Then also, technology access is one of the benefits of carbon credits in a way that once the clean energy technologies and fuels are really promoted, then subsidization come from the carbon credit revenues from carbon credits or taxes imposed on the polluters, which helps to subsidize the renewable energy technologies. For instance, Uganda has a waiver on clean cooking technologies. So the VAT tax is reduced. It's not like for other products, so that can enable the adoption and increase the use. Job creation, jobs are created when the projects, renewable energy projects are set up and really developed. And as the last thing could be is energy access, increase in energy access. Of course, once more innovators are funded to start or increase scale up their manufacture of renewable energies or clean fuels, then it means that they will become cheaper and readily available, meaning that many people or households will be able to access, to increase the access of clean energy and renewable. So now we are bringing energy and also the environmental aspect, because now when we promote the use of renewable energies or renewable and clean energies, it means that the population reduce their reliance on the environment for energy needs. Like I had told you that still globally over 1.2 billion people still rely on conventional sources, including fuel, firewood, charcoal, and so. And when we did a survey in Uganda, we discovered that more than 99% of the schools still rely on firewood for cooking. And we went ahead to do energy auditing. These schools were spending a lot of money and they were really expressing some reason they are tired. Getting firewood is becoming a problem because forests have been cut down, and that has increased the price of firewood and then the cost of operation. But not only that, they also expressed their concern about health of the cooks. That no cook is always there for more than 7 years, and when they go, they face really serious health, respiratory health issues due to exposure to smoke from firewood. And that smoke is more dangerous than someone who smokes cigarette. So now, when we use carbon credits to promote adoption of renewable energy, one, we are able to protect, to conserve our environment, given that there is less reliance, and also now clean cooking technologies like electric pressure cookers, boilers, among others, they reduce carbon emissions. And then when carbon emissions are reduced, we have clean air, so we can breathe clean air with now that will reduce on healthy complications, especially those respiratory health issues. And then climate resiliency, so the trees are conserved, meaning we don't have soil erosion, and then the normal way of how rain is created is through the evaporation and all that still takes place. So we can have a chance to have a normal weather. And also a circular economy where resources are well managed in a sustainable way so that the current generation can meet its needs without compromising what the future needs. So some of the success stories of renewable energy projects and which are generating high carbon credits. One is the Lake Turkana wind power project. This is the largest in Africa, actually, with 365 turbines and generates around 310 megawatts of electricity. That generates 300 megawatts of electricity and using our local resources, wind. Like I told you, Africa has a lot of untapped potentials. But it's good to hear that this is in Kenya and it's really a priority. Then another example is solar capital in South Africa. This is also the largest solar farm in Africa, and it produces 75 megawatts of solar photovoltaic installation. So the two projects show that carbon financing really helps in establishing large-scale clean energy deployment, which now goes to the other benefits, like I explained, in technological adoption, employment creation, increasing access to energy. Because if wind energy farm in Kenya is producing 310 megawatts, it means it's able to supplement on other local renewable energy sources in Kenya. So that helps to increase on issues to stabilize and solve the issues of energy security in Kenya. But another success story is from Uganda. Actually, of recent last year, around October, I can quote well, Uganda was the first country to receive a carbon-based granting of around 36 million US dollars in sub-Saharan Africa for its contribution in reduction of cutting down of trees. And the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development in Uganda is really aggressive and so serious in promoting the use of clean energy and clean gas and sustainable energy, and also which could also contribute, which is contributing to the conservation of trees. Maybe, like I told you, that in Africa, the leading cause of carbon emission is what our traditional agricultural practices. So the ministry is doing its role for the energy side. Then the Ministry of Agriculture is also doing its role. Then what the adoption and the campaigning of adopting of carbon credit-based financing to drive renewable energy has its own challenges. One of the challenges is the double accounting, given that there are different formulas and then there are different multiple parties along the chain. So as a result, then the issue of double accounting, where it is not clear who is supposed to benefit, how and where. Then another challenge, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, that we are still developing the frameworks. They are not yet fully developed to include everyone on board, because we realize that there are many people down who are innovating. They have wonderful clean energy innovations, but they are not considered in the current frameworks, as some of the countries in Africa are still relying on international frameworks, which at times tend to ignore the local needs. Then the credit quality is another challenge, in a way that not all credits represent real reductions. Some people are given credits, but some innovators are given credits, but these credits now come in a way that if I have my modern charcoal stove, I am selling, and I quote the price at $50. Then an organization or a company or a government can come and subsidize it and say, we are giving you carbon credits. Instead of selling it at $50, we are going to pay you $20, and then you sell at $30. However, sometimes some of them are not really tested. And even the innovation like the stove may be good, but then the quality of fuel used there can cause more emissions. What's the way forward? What should sub-Saharan Africa do if we are to accelerate the development and the adoption of renewable energy to conserve our environment? Research shows that over 80% of the countries under the nationally determined contributions contract, they are willing to use carbon market mechanisms in their development and renewable energy acceleration. However, there are priority actions that we need to take as government, policymakers, and practitioners. One, that there is a need to develop strong national carbon market frameworks which align with the nationally determined contribution. However, these are supposed, I agree, and I go back to refer to what my colleague Aaron says, that these frameworks or policies, whatever, if they are developed and they don't consider the local needs of the people, they become almost irrelevant. They'll be good on paper, but when it comes to action, they don't solve any problem. Then again, the governments in sub-Saharan Africa, they need to strengthen the capacity of institutions for carbon participation. So different institutions their capacity should be strengthened. That could be through training, then peer-to-peer learning, and also funding, so that they can actively participate. And these institutions, mostly government institutions, which are directly responsible for monitoring and also implementing the projects in these lands. Then, of course, going back to what the previous presenters have talked about, safeguards to protect the communities. Yes, the government needs to set up these safeguards to protect the social safeguards to protect the communities and the environment as we are pursuing for these carbon credits. Otherwise, the self-seekers may come and exploit the less informed citizens to benefit from their knowledge, their innovations, and so on. And also, if the African governments need to come up, when you leave the private sector to lead, then companies, their main objective is profit maximization, but the government needs to come in and set out the balance between the social environment and then the economic incentives for the private sector to participate. Well, back actually to what Aaron talked about, the policy of all the vehicles in the country. Then there's a need to prioritize emission reduction over revenue generation. And this is exactly the problem now in Africa. When you set up a policy, then it is hijacked by the need to increase revenues other than now conserving the environment. So they need now the governments in Africa need to come up with clear safeguards, some policies and clear definitions and goals, so that some policies perhaps could be implemented separately from others, and to ensure that the intended goals are achieved as set. But again, there's another advantage that African governments can rely on, can utilize, like leveraging on the already set and support from international organizations like United Nations and the others. They are already willing to support in capacity building, funding, among others. So what are key takeaways from our today's presentation? One is that carbon credits, if well implemented, can help bridge the over 100 billion financing gap in clean energy. Every year, whenever leaders from Africa travel to COP, they always talk about financing gaps. And now carbon credits could be one of the financing vehicles to close that gap. Secondly, as I said before, Africa has a vast potential of natural resources which can be used to generate renewable and clean energies, such as solar, because here in Africa, sun is in abundance in most countries, wind, hydro, and geothermal. However, these resources are not well utilized or fully utilized. Third, there's a need to establish high integrity frameworks to ensure real climate impacts are achieved. The policy should not be overridden by revenue interest or political seekers. This marks the end of my presentation and discussion with you. Thank you so much for listening. I hand over again to Sela. Thank you, Sela.
Thank you so much, Herbert. Your presentation was so insightful. I've always wondered about carbon credit, and I've always asked myself if my country, Malawi, would benefit from it. And today you just answered my questions. I don't know if Mbacham would like to unmute and ask your question.
So, Herbert, thank you so much for a great presentation and great work that you are doing over there. Following Salah, I'm particularly really interested in cook stove projects because one, I participated in one. Well, not one, but working with bond manufacturing, I had opportunity to promote part of the program of activities in the DRC and in West Africa, Senegal in particular. So yeah, really, I understand a lot about the importance and the impact that such projects could bring. It is quite an opportunity for local communities, not only local communities, but everyone living in the cities to untap because it does not only help fight, reduce dependence on biomass from the forest, but it also plays a big role in health, like interior health with the smoke reduction and so on, and it's also effective. My question is more about, this is a big one. It's always the question we always try to answer. It's about double counting, double claiming, more about your NRV system. So how do you design this MRV, your monitoring, your reporting, so your system in such a way that we don't have these overlaps, this double counting or double claiming of emissions, given that the idea is to displace traditional technologies or traditional or fuels or reduce their consumption. And most of the times, our mothers, our grandmothers would not want to give away their trees on fireside because maybe they saw us or a project has bought a fancy cook stove, which is really nice, but they will always have that tendency to go back to the kitchen and use those fuels. And many projects just take an assumption that this person has they call it how do we call it again? The user's acceptance. So this person has a user acceptance, he's using the stove and he's using it 3 times a week based on the baseline that you are building for the project. And this is the amount of charcoal, amount of firewood that they use, and that is what they use, the factors that we use to do the emission calculations. So most of the times it doesn't happen like that. Maybe the person will use it just once or none, or maybe use the other stuff. So how do you really design this system in such a way that you are aware and you are confident that yes, this person has used this improved stove twice, or this person has not used this traditional stove anymore? That's just my question. I know that.
Thank you, Mbacha, for that wonderful question. I think that's one of the major challenges still affecting the carbon credit markets in Africa. But one of the ways of avoiding double counting, there should be really uniformity in the methods used to reward or to capture the carbon credits. For instance, the governments could stick, if it is a government, could stick to international frameworks set up in measuring of these carbon emissions, and then the people who are using who benefits from how, where, and that capture the data throughout. Then, so for instance, actually, how can I say this? Failing to get a better way to explain it. Of course, I was talking about now using the international standards to ensure that there is uniformity. They are applied uniformly across all the sectors or the parties engaged. However, the country can, at a national level, the country can also establish transparency requirements in a way that the project details are publicly available to everyone. So It doesn't come like someone claims it here, and then another person comes later and says, okay, this is our project. And then the issuance of records can also be, should also be transparent.
And I would just like to let the audience know that the discussion of nature-based finance will continue, and our second session will be happening on the 9th of February, 7:30, 7 o'clock South African time, and please join us again. Thank you so much, and usiku wabwino kwa inu nonse. That means good night in our Malawian language.